"Officer, arrest him right now." That shrill voice wasn't coming from the cops. It was Karen Whitfield screaming from the shoreline, clipboard in one hand, neon vest blinding in the sun. I was waist deep in the lake, still dripping from a swim, when two patrol cars pulled up behind her. Karen jabbed her finger toward me like she was calling in a manhunt. "He's trespassing on community property," she screeched. "HOA law, fine is $1,000. The younger cop frowned. Swimming?" "Yes," Karen barked. "This lake belongs to us. He thinks he's above the rules. Make him pay." I climbed up onto the dock, water running off me in streams, calm, steady. I pointed at the weathered deed map, nailed to the boathouse. "This entire lake," I said, voice flat, "is mine." Gasps from the neighbors. The cops exchanged looks. Karen's face twisted red. "You'll lose everything unless you pay," she shouted, her voice cracking. I smirked, shaking water from my hair. "Funny," I said. "You're the one about to pay." Ever been fined for something you already owned? Drop it in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. My name's James Thowes, and this is the story of how an HOA tried to fine me $1,000 for swimming in my own lake. When I first laid eyes on the lake house, I knew it wasn't just another property, it was the dream I'd been chasing for years. 3 acres of land, a private dock stretching into the water, and the kind of peace you can't buy in the city. I grew up near water, and I always told myself one day I wouldn't just live by a lake. I'd own it, not community access, not a shared park, but deeded property. When the realtor handed me the papers and I saw the entire lake was included, I nearly laughed out loud. For once, the dream wasn't slipping away. It was mine. Life here was everything I hoped for. My wife, Linda, fired up the grill on weekends. The kids cannonballed off the dock until sunset, their laughter echoing across the water. I'd sit back in a lawn chair, lying in the water, thinking, this is the life I worked for. At first, the HOA seemed harmless. Streets clean, lawns trimmed, neighbors waved. The community even felt welcoming. But then came the warnings. Tom Henderson, a Navy vet down the street, muttered, "Watch out for Karen." Mrs. Harris whispered, "She fined me for planting roses." The Johnsons shook their heads, saying she patrols with a clipboard like she owns the place. I brushed it off. Every neighborhood has someone like that, strict about rules, quick to complain. I figured Karen Whitfield was nothing more than a nuisance. But Karen wasn't just strict, she was obsessed with control, and the one thing she wanted most was the very thing that made this house mine, my lake. I thought the water would bring peace. I didn't realize it was about to start a war. I'll never forget the sound of that knock, sharp, rehearsed. The kind of knock that isn't asking permission to enter, it's demanding it. I opened the door and there she was, Karen Whitfield, HOA president, standing on my porch with her clipboard pressed to her chest like a badge of honor. Neon vest zipped up to her chin, sunglasses perched too low on her nose so she could glare right over the rim. "Mr. Thowes," she said, her tone clipped, "you are in violation of HOA bylaws, Section 7, Article 2. I frowned. Violation? For what? She snapped the clipboard open, yanked a paper from under it and thrust it at me. A bright yellow slip with bold letters across the top, "Fine notice." "For unauthorized swimming," she declared, "you were observed in the lake without HOA approval. That water belongs to the community, not to you personally." For a moment, I just stared at her. Then I laughed, short and bitter. "You fined me for swimming in my own lake?" Her lips pursed, eyes narrowing. "It's not your lake, it's part of Brookstone Estates. And as HOA president, I'm responsible for maintaining property values. People can't just splash around whenever they want." I stepped off the porch and pointed past her shoulder at the dock, the water glinting in the distance. "That dock? That lake? It's deeded to my property. I own every inch of it." Karen tilted her chin up. "Deeds don't override HOA rules." Behind her, 2 neighbors lingered on the sidewalk, Tom Henderson and Mrs. Harris, both pretending to be out for a walk but clearly watching the showdown. Tom's jaw tightened. Mrs. Harris clutched her cat carrier like a shield. I went back inside, grabbed the folded map I'd pinned to the wall, and returned to the porch. I unfolded it with deliberate care, pointing at the thick black lines that encircled the lake. "See this? Lot 17? That's me. Everything inside? That's mine. The HOA can't touch it." Karen didn't even glance at the paper. She just smirked. "Paper doesn't change the fact that I make the rules here. And according to my rules, you owe the HOA $1,000. The arrogance in her voice made my blood boil. "You think you're above state law? Above recorded property deeds?" Karen crossed her arms. "I'm above you." Gasps rippled from the neighbors, though they quickly looked away when she shot them daggers. I held up the fine notice between two fingers, the yellow paper shaking slightly in the breeze. This is garbage, you can't enforce it. She leaned closer, voice low and poisonous. Refuse to pay, and it escalates. First, additional fines, then liens. Before long, you won't just lose the lake, you'll lose your home. For a second, the world seemed to go quiet. Birds stopped chirping. The breeze stilled. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I wanted to tear the paper in half, throw it in her face. But instead, I folded it neatly and tucked it into my back pocket. Because at that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just a petty power play. This wasn't a neighbor complaining about grass height or trash bins. Karen was making a claim on the very thing that defined this property, the lake itself. She wasn't warning me, she was declaring war. And if she thought I was the type of man to roll over and pay, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. The knock came sharp, like someone hammering a nail into my front door. I wiped my hands on a rag, still smelling of lake water, and opened it. And there she was, Karen Whitfield. Clipboard clutched like a weapon, neon vest zipped to her chin, sunglasses reflecting my porch light. Even her stance screamed authority. 1 foot forward, chin tilted up. "Mr. Thowes," she said, her voice like a cold slap, "you are in violation of HOA bylaws." I raised an eyebrow. Violation? For what? She snapped her clipboard open, tore a paper free, and shoved it at my chest. Bold black letters shouted back at me, "Fine notice." "For unauthorized swimming," she declared. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. Swimming? Her tone sharpened. "Yes, you were observed swimming in the lake yesterday evening without prior HOA approval. That is a direct violation of community rules." A laugh escaped before I could stop it. "Lady, I own that lake." Her mouth thinned. "The lake is community property. All use must be approved through me, as president." Behind her, 2 neighbors lingered on the sidewalk. Tom Henderson, hands in his pockets, and Mrs. Harris clutching her cat carrier like she'd wandered into a crime scene. They pretended to be casual, but their eyes were locked on us. I stepped off the porch, holding her paper between 2 fingers like it was diseased. "Karen, let me make this very clear. I bought this property. The deed includes the entire lake, shoreline to shoreline. You can't fine me for swimming in my own water." Karen smirked, lips curling like she'd been waiting for that line. "Deeds don't override HOA bylaws." My jaw tightened. "Yes, they do." Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but I felt the heat of her glare. "You think you're above the rules? You're not. I set the standard here. Everyone complies or they pay." I turned, walked inside, and came back with the rolled survey map I'd kept by the desk. I spread it open across the porch rail, the thick black outline circling the lake like a crown. "Lot 17, I said, jabbing my finger at the page. "James Thowes, sole owner, this lake isn't yours. It isn't the HOA's, it's mine." She didn't even glance down, she just crossed her arms. "Paperwork doesn't matter, rules matter. And as long as you live here, you answer to me." Neighbors gasped softly. Tom's jaw clenched. Mrs. Harris whispered something under her breath, but Karen didn't flinch. I folded the map slowly, deliberately, as my blood boiled. "You're out of line." Karen leaned forward, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You owe the association $1,000. Refuse to pay and the consequences escalate. Additional fines. Then liens. And if you keep defying me, you'll lose more than your lake. You'll lose your home." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were true, they weren't, but because of the confidence behind them. She believed every syllable. I forced myself to stay calm. "You can't threaten me with something you don't control." Karen tilted her chin higher. "I control everything here." For a second, the whole cul-de-sac went silent. The only sound was the faint slap of water against the dock. I slipped the notice into my back pocket, the paper stiff against my hand. I didn't rip it. I didn't throw it back. I saved it. Because I knew this was only the beginning. Karen straightened her vest, snapped her clipboard shut, and strutted down the steps. She walked past Tom and Mrs. Harris like a general passing her troops, daring them to look away. Tom gave me a nod of sympathy. Mrs. Harris avoided my eye. At the curb, Karen swung onto her golf cart, its yellow beacon flashing. She revved the engine and called out over her shoulder, "You have 7 days, Mr. Thowes. Pay or face the consequences." The cart rolled away, lights blinking like a warning siren. I stood on the porch, fists clenched so tight my knuckles cracked. Linda appeared behind me, wiping flour from her hands. What did she want? I turned, showing her the yellow notice. $1,000. Linda's eyes widened. For what? For swimming in our own lake. She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. Then she laughed bitterly. She can't be serious. Oh, she's serious, I muttered, shoving the notice into the kitchen drawer. Dead serious. That night, as the kids played upstairs and Linda cleaned the dishes, I sat alone at the table staring at that slip of paper. $1,000 wasn't the issue. The issue was the claim behind it. Karen wasn't trying to enforce lawn care or mailbox paint. She was making a move on the lake, the crown jewel of my property. The reason I bought this place. I could almost hear her voice echoing in my head. You'll lose everything unless you pay. But in that moment I made a vow. This wasn't just a fine, it wasn't a warning, it was a declaration of war. And if Karen Whitfield thought I'd fold, she was about to learn she'd picked the wrong enemy. The first fine had been ridiculous enough, but I didn't realize it was only the opening shot. Within a week, Karen came back. This time I was grilling burgers on the back deck, smoke curling up into the warm evening air. The kids were tossing a ball in the yard. Linda set out plates. For a moment, it felt like the life I'd always wanted. Then I saw the neon vest rounding the corner. Karen marched straight across the lawn without knocking, clipboard already open. She slapped another yellow slip onto the patio table, right between the ketchup and the coleslaw. Violation: unauthorized dock installation. Fine, $500. I nearly dropped the spatula. The dock? That dock's been here since the 70s. She didn't blink. Not approved by the HOA. All structures must be cleared through me. I laughed. A short, sharp sound. Karen, the dock was here before you were president. Probably before you even moved in. Doesn't matter, she said flatly. If it wasn't approved, it's illegal. Linda stepped up beside me, arms folded. Illegal? You're not law enforcement, Karen. You're a neighbor with a clipboard. Karen bristled, but didn't break. You'll pay or you'll face further penalties. Then she turned and strode off, scribbling notes like she'd just issued a speeding ticket. I picked up the slip, crumpled it, and almost tossed it in the trash, but then I stopped. Something in me said keep it, so I smoothed it out and tucked it into a folder in my desk. 2 days later, I found another notice taped to my boat, big red letters across the page, unsafe storage. I stared at the old aluminum fishing boat tied neatly to the dock, covered with a tarp. Unsafe? It had been sitting there for months. I muttered to myself, what's next? A fine for looking at the water too long? Right on cue, Karen's golf cart appeared at the edge of the lawn. She lifted her megaphone, yes, a megaphone, and announced, boat storage is restricted to approved community lots. That vessel is a hazard. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Kids stopped riding their bikes. All eyes were on me as Karen thundered down the street like a one-woman parade. I waved the paper in the air. Karen, this is my dock, my boat, my property. You can't regulate where I tie a boat I own on a lake I own. She smirked, revved the cart, and called back. We'll see about that in arbitration. I added the slip to the growing pile. By the third notice, even Linda couldn't hide her disgust. We came back from groceries to find a bright yellow paper taped right to the mailbox. Violation: swimming without certified lifeguard present. Fine. I read it twice, then a third time, shaking my head in disbelief. She's fining us for swimming again, this time because we don't have a lifeguard. Linda snatched it out of my hand. That's harassment. Pure harassment. The kids overheard, their laughter dying as they hovered near the porch. My youngest asked quietly, Dad, are we in trouble? I crouched, resting a hand on his shoulder. No, son. We're not in trouble. Karen is, but it didn't stop at paper notices. Karen started escalating her war face to face. One Saturday, we hosted a barbecue. Friends, family, neighbors all gathered around the grill. Music played, kids splashed in the water, the smell of ribs filled the air. For once, I felt normal again. Then Karen arrived. She parked her golf cart at the curb and stormed up the lawn, phone in hand. This gathering is out of control. You're disturbing the peace. I set down the tongs. It's a family cookout, Karen. Relax. She snapped pictures, one after another, circling the yard like a paparazzi. This is disorderly conduct. I'll be calling the sheriff. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. The deputy stepped out, confused. We got a noise complaint? Karen shoved her phone in his face. Look at this chaos. They're violating HOA event rules. Unauthorized assembly. The deputy glanced at the kids with dripping popsicles and the grandparents lounging in lawn chairs. He shook his head. Ma'am, this isn't a crime. Looks like a barbecue to me. Karen sputtered, but the deputy walked away. Still, the damage was done. My guests shifted uncomfortably. The fun drained from the air. The barbecue ended early. That night, I sat at the table, staring at the growing pile of notices. Dock, boat, swimming, barbecue. She was coming after me with everything she had, no matter how absurd. And it wasn't just me. One evening Tom Henderson knocked on my door, a crumpled slip in his hand. She fined me for my mailbox. Said it was an inch too tall. I frowned. She did the same to me. Well, try. Tom sighed. She's getting bold. She told me if I didn't replace it, she'd double the fine. Later that week, Mrs. Harris shuffled up with her cat on a leash. She whispered. She fined me for having the wrong color flag. Said it clashed with community standards. $50. Even the Johnsons confessed. She fined us for our swing set. Said it wasn't approved. Their kids clung to their legs, confused why their playground was suddenly a problem. It was clear Karen wasn't just targeting me. She was running a campaign of fear, nickel and diming the neighborhood into silence. That's when I bought the box. A plain, metal file box with a lock. I labeled it in bold letters, Karen. Every notice went inside. Every photo she snapped. Every slip she taped. Every complaint she invented. Dock violation. Boat violation. Lifeguard violation. Barbecue harassment. Even notes from neighbors who whispered, she fined us too. I logged dates, times, copies. I treated every scrap of paper like evidence. Linda raised an eyebrow when she saw me at the table, carefully stacking the slips. You planning to build a bonfire? No, I said, locking the box. I'm planning to build a case. By the end of the month, the box was half full. Karen thought she was burying me in paperwork, but what she didn't realize was that every slip, every false fine, every absurd rule was another nail in her coffin. And as I clicked the lock shut that night, I felt the shift. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was ammunition. And one day soon, I was going to fire it all back. The file box was already half full when Linda finally sat me down at the kitchen table. She set aside the stack of dishes she'd been washing, dried her hands on a towel, and slid into the chair across from me. James, she said calmly, we need to go over the deed. I frowned. I've already shown it to Karen. She ignored it. Linda leaned forward, eyes steady. That doesn't matter. What matters is we know exactly what it says and how the law backs us up. She disappeared into the study and returned with the thick manila folder we kept for the house. She spread out the deed across the table, smoothing the creases. My name in bold, Lot 17 circled. The black lines wrapped neatly around the entire lake. See here, she said, tapping her finger along the edge. This isn't community property. It's not even partially shared. The lake is fully within our parcel. That means we have exclusive rights. I exhaled, staring at the ink that had become the center of our war. So she's just making it up? Linda nodded. Yes. And more than that, she's committing fraud by telling neighbors the HOA owns it. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. She really thinks a clipboard overrides this? Linda gave a humorless smile. Karen doesn't understand how property law works. Let me explain something most people don't know. She pulled out a second document, a printout she'd marked with sticky notes. Riparian rights, she said. Ever heard of them? I shook my head. Riparian rights are water rights attached to land ownership, she explained. If a water body lies entirely within a property boundary, like our lake, it belongs to the landowner. The only way anyone else can use it legally is through an easement, which has to be recorded on the deed. And guess what? There's no easement here. I blinked, letting that sink in. So the HOA has zero claim? Exactly. Nugget. In U.S. property law, HOAs cannot claim lakes, ponds, or water rights without a specific deeded easement. If no easement is listed, the water is private property. Linda flipped another page. Federal versus local authority also matters here. An HOA is nothing more than a private corporation run by neighbors. They can't override deeds, they can't override state law, and they definitely can't touch federal jurisdiction. I rubbed my temples, and yet Karen struts around like her bylaws are the Constitution. Linda's eyes darkened. Her bylaws stop at the property line. Once she tried to enforce them over a deeded lake, she crossed into fraud territory. Later that night, Claire dropped by after her shift at the sheriff's office. She plopped her badge on the counter and poured herself some iced tea. Mom told me about the dock fine, she said, shaking her head, and the lifeguard nonsense. That woman's reckless. Reckless? I asked. She's out of control. Claire smirked. Let me tell you something about people who wave papers and call them law. They bank on intimidation, not legality. Half the time, they don't even know what they're talking about. Linda nodded. That's what makes Karen dangerous. She thinks her authority is unlimited. I showed Claire the latest slip from the box. She skimmed it, whistled low. Swimming without a lifeguard? That's laughable. If she filed that in any court, it'd get tossed in a heartbeat. But she's scaring neighbors, I muttered. Tom's mailbox, Mrs. Harris's flag, the Johnsons' swing set. She's bleeding everyone dry. Claire set the slip down, her jaw tight. That's the part that matters. She's not just overreaching, she's using fear to control people. Linda folded her arms, which makes it harassment, plain and simple. The next morning, Linda handed me a printed section from the HOA bylaws themselves. She'd highlighted half the page. "Look here," she said. "Even in their own rules, they can't touch anything outside of common property. Streets, sidewalks, maybe the clubhouse lawn, but our lake, it's excluded." I raised my eyebrows. So she's breaking her own rules. Linda smiled grimly. "Exactly, which means every fine she's written is fraudulent." Nugget: HOAs are bound by their own bylaws. If they issue fines outside of their jurisdiction, those fines are unenforceable and can expose the HOA to lawsuits. I felt my stomach turn. So technically she's lying to every neighbor she's fine. "Yes," Linda said, "and if she keeps pushing, she'll be facing more than angry neighbors. She'll be facing the law." That night, as I locked another slip into the metal file box, I caught my reflection in the steel. My face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes hard. When we bought this property, I'd imagined peaceful nights on the porch, not cataloging harassment like evidence for a trial. Linda came up behind me, resting her hand on my shoulder. "James, listen to me. If Karen keeps this up, she's walking into federal territory." I turned, meeting her gaze. "Federal territory?" She nodded firmly. "Fraud, harassment, false claims on deeded water rights. That's not petty HOA nonsense anymore. That's the kind of thing inspectors and judges don't ignore." I shut the box with a snap, the lock clicking shut like a gavel. For the first time I felt the shift inside me. This wasn't just Karen being annoying. This wasn't petty fines and childish rules. This was fraud. And if she kept pushing, it wouldn't stay civil. It started with a letter from the county. I opened the mailbox one morning, expecting bills and junk flyers, only to find an official-looking envelope stamped with the county seal. My stomach sank. Nothing good ever comes in envelopes that stiff. I tore it open at the kitchen table. Notice of violation, unsafe water hazard. Pursuant to county complaint, the body of water located at Lot 17 may present a risk to public safety. Investigation required. Linda looked up from her coffee. "What in the world?" I read it twice, 3 times. My blood boiled. Unsafe water hazard. That's our lake. And you know who filed this complaint? Claire, still in her deputy's uniform from the night shift, leaned over my shoulder. "You're right," says here, anonymous community report. Guess who fits the bill? I slammed the letter onto the table. She's dragging the county into this now. Linda set her mug down carefully. "James, breathe. We have the deed. We have the rights. The county will see this is baseless." But I knew the damage wasn't about the truth. It was about hassle, intimidation, paperwork piling up until we cracked. 2 days later I walked out to the dock and nearly dropped my tackle box. Brand new signs had been bolted into the ground at the lake's edge. Cheap aluminum with reflective paint. "Community swim area, HOA rules apply, use at your own risk." I tore one free from the post and carried it back up the lawn. Linda met me halfway, her eyes wide. "Where did that come from?" "Karen," I growled, shaking the sign. "She's claiming this is her community swim area now." Linda pressed her lips tight. "That's not just harassment, that's trespassing." Nugget: HOAs cannot post signage or claim jurisdiction on private, deeded property. Doing so is considered trespass and can open them up to civil and criminal liability. I leaned the sign against the porch rail, the metal still warm from the sun. She's getting bolder. First fake fines, now staking her flag on our land. Claire joined us after her shift, squinting at the sign. "This isn't just bold, Dad. This is illegal. Posting false notices on property you don't own? That's textbook fraud." But Karen wasn't done. That weekend, she called an emergency HOA meeting in the cul-de-sac. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Her voice carried like a megaphone across the lawns. Effective immediately, she announced, all residents will contribute an additional $200 in monthly HOA fees for lake maintenance. I froze in my yard, rake in hand. Lake maintenance? My lake? She continued, reading from her clipboard as neighbors shifted uncomfortably. This fee ensures the water remains safe for community recreation. Payments are due starting next month. Tom Henderson muttered loud enough for me to hear, "Since when do we swim there?" Mrs. Harris whispered, "I thought the Thous family owned it." Karen barked, "Ownership doesn't matter. Community safety matters. As president, I declare these fees binding." I walked over, planting myself in the crowd. "Karen, you've crossed the line. That lake isn't yours to charge for, it's mine." Karen didn't flinch. She jabbed the clipboard toward me like a sword. "You will pay your share, Mr. Thous, or face penalties up to loss of property rights." The neighbors gasped. Someone actually whispered, "Can she do that?" I held up my voice steady, though rage burned in my chest. "No, she can't, and you all know it." Karen's sunglasses flashed. "We'll see what the county says when I show them your violations." I stared her down, every muscle in my body screaming to lash out, to shout until she broke. But instead, I took a deep breath and said nothing. Because right then I realized shouting wouldn't stop her. She thrived on it. Every argument gave her fuel, made her look like the authority. What would stop her was evidence. That night, I added the county letter to the file box, slid the community swim sign into the garage as physical proof, and typed out a full log of the HOA meeting word for word from memory. Linda sat across from me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "You're shaking," she said softly. "I'm furious," I admitted. "She's not just handing out fake fines anymore. She's inventing fees, stealing authority, trying to strip us of rights we own outright." Linda nodded, "And that's why we don't give her the satisfaction of yelling. We build the case, brick by brick." I locked the box with a click, my jaw tight. For months, I thought Karen was just a nuisance. Now I knew better. She wasn't just breaking rules. She was breaking law. And if she thought she could bully me into silence, she was about to find out I could fight louder without raising my voice at all. I heard the distant whine of an engine before I saw the lights. 2 patrol cars rolling down our cul-de-sac like it was a crime scene. The hair on my arms prickled. I was halfway through a lap, water sluicing off my shoulders, when Karen's voice cut through the afternoon. "That man is trespassing," she screamed, standing at the water's edge with her clipboard raised like a banner. The younger cop climbed out of his vehicle, rubbing his eyes, clearly annoyed to have been summoned for a lakeside dispute. Karen jabbed her finger at me as if that simple motion would turn me into a criminal. "He's in our community water," she shouted. "Unofficial swimming. Trespass. You need to remove him and cite him under HOA statute." The older officer glanced at Karen, then at the calm blue surface where white ripples warmed in the sun. He looked uncertain. I climbed out of the water and walked to the dock, letting the wet wood soak up the hem of my shorts. I wrapped a towel around my waist and took in the scene, neighbors peeking from porches, kids frozen mid-splash, the weight of eyes on us. My chest felt oddly calm, like breathing under a deep sea. "Officers," I said politely, hands raised slightly to show I meant no trouble. "I'm James Thous. I own this property, including the lake. There must be a misunderstanding." One deputy folded his arms. "Ma'am," said, "this is community property." He glanced at Karen, then back at me. "We usually respond to complaints like this." Karen pushed forward, voice strident. "He swims here every day. He's been running private operations, disturbing people, inviting guests. I have every right. This affects property values. Enforce HOA rules." She thrust a photocopied flyer in the officer's face, pages flapping. I felt the irritation rise, but I kept my voice even. "If you'll allow me," I reached for the roll of property documents I keep in a dry case by the boathouse and unfolded the survey right there on the dock rail. The paper snapped in the breeze like a flag. Lot 17, clear lines, the lake inside my boundary. The deed language was plain, with the county recorder's stamp in the corner. I pointed, slow enough that the officers read along with me. Parcel includes the water body and bed beneath, riparian and littoral rights conveyed to owner. The younger deputy peered down. "Looks pretty clear," he admitted, almost apologetic. The older officer adjusted his posture and raised a hand, a sign he wanted to end the show. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "we're not HOA enforcers. If Mr. Thous holds the deed, that's civil property law, not something we can cite under local ordinance." Karen's face flushed with that mix of pride and fury that had become her hallmark. "You can't just ignore community standards," she said. "We voted on this." Her voice pitched higher, desperate for validation. The deputy's expression hardened. "Voting doesn't give you the power to criminalize private property. If you have concerns about illegal activity, file paperwork through the proper channels. But calling 911 to enforce HOA bylaws isn't what those patrols are for." He made a note on his pad, the movement small but decisive. He folded the notepad and pocketed his pen. The older officer paused and asked for proof. I fetched the sealed tube with certified copies, the deed, the recorded survey, the county stamp. The deputy read the riparian language aloud, and his voice hardened. "This is recorded," he said. "This looks like a civil property matter." Karen flipped through her phone photos but had no county filing, only emails and an online poll. The officer warned her that repeated false reports and misuse of emergency services could be considered harassment. Neighbors whispered. A few admitted they feared speaking up. Tom clapped my shoulder and Mrs. Harris nodded. The deputies said they'd document the call, advised civil remedies, and reminded Karen not to call 911 for HOA disputes. She watched them go. Clipboard slack, her certainty cracked. I felt a cold clarity settle. This interaction would be added to the file, every misstep recorded, every claim countered. Linda squeezed my hand. We both knew the path forward: document, notify, and pursue justice patiently without losing focus. Karen jabbed at the photocopy in the officer's hand. He'll pay, he will. I'll make sure of it. Her certainty sounded hollow when set against the county recorder stamp and the crisp language of my deed. She looked smaller for a heartbeat, then tried to muster defiance. The deputy's tone had the thin edge of a warning. Ma'am, making false reports can be considered harassment. Repeatedly summoning law enforcement over private disputes could have consequences. We expect community members to use civil remedies before calling for police intervention. Karen opened her mouth, searching for a barb that would land. Then the younger officer cleared his throat. We'll document the call, but unless there's criminal activity, we're not placing citations tonight. He folded the notepad and pocketed his pen. She stood there, breath coming fast. Her clipboard trembled. The lights on the patrol cars blinked once, then were calmer. The officers exchanged a look and started to move back toward their vehicles. I felt a strange cocktail of relief and anger wash through me. The bacteria of fear she'd tried to seed in the neighborhood sputtered out, but Karen turned to me with eyes burning and spat. This isn't over. You think you can hide behind paper. Next time I'll bring enough evidence to make this stick. I answered quietly as the deputies climbed back in, their cruisers idling with a low hum. I bent and picked up the wet towel, wrapping it around my shoulders. Next time, I said, my voice low so only she could hear. I'm not just proving you wrong, I'm making you pay. Her jaw clenched. We'll see. As the patrol cars rolled away and the heat leaked back into the afternoon, I could feel the gears shifting in my head. That incident hadn't been an end. It had been a turning point. I tucked the copy of the deed back into its waterproof tube and made a mental list of the next moves. Document, collect, wait. The war wasn't only about proving ownership anymore. It was about ensuring every false step she took would cost her in the end. The folding chairs squeaked against the polished floor as neighbors filled the Brookstone Community Hall. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything feel harsher, less forgiving. I sat in the second row with Linda at my side, a heavy folder on my lap. Inside were deeds, photos, county records, and every slip of paper Karen had shoved at me these last miserable months. The weight of it felt like a shield. Karen stood at the front of the room, clipboard clutched like a holy text. She wore her neon vest as if it were a uniform, her hair pulled tight, eyes hidden behind sunglasses even indoors. Her voice cut through the chatter like a gavel. Order! Order in this meeting, she barked. The room hushed. She slapped a stack of papers onto the podium. I called this special HOA meeting to address a serious issue of fraud, trespassing, and misconduct by one resident, Mr. James Those. Every head turned toward me. I didn't flinch. Karen jabbed a finger in my direction. This man has been swimming illegally in community property, storing unapproved boats, and refusing to pay mandatory fees. He is undermining the HOA's authority and threatening property values. Tonight we will vote to enforce penalties and, if necessary, remove his access to community amenities. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded nervously. Others frowned. Tom Henderson folded his arms, his jaw tight. Mrs. Harris shook her head slowly. I rose from my chair, calm, deliberate, and walked to the front. My folder hit the table with a loud Karen, you've said a lot, I said evenly. But there's one problem: you haven't said a single true thing. Her smile was thin, brittle. Oh, really? Then explain these bylaws. She waved a stapled packet of papers like it was scripture. Article 7, Section 4, lake use is restricted to approved HOA members only. That's binding. I picked up the packet, flipped through it, and held it up for the room. Binding, you say? Too bad this document is a fake. Gasps. I slammed another page onto the podium, the certified county deed. Here is the recorded deed to Lot 17. My name, my signature, my lake. No easements, no shared rights, exclusive ownership. I held up the survey map, the lake neatly outlined. This isn't community property, it's private property, period. Karen's voice cracked. You're twisting words. Bylaws override deeds. A laugh broke out. Tom Henderson's. "That's not how the law works, Karen," he called out. "You've been lying to all of us." Neighbors leaned forward, whispering. The tide was turning. I spread more papers across the table, photocopies of the fake fines, letters with her signature, the county's dismissal of her unsafe water complaint. Each one hit the wood like a hammer blow. "This," I said, tapping the stack, "is fraud. She posted illegal signs on my property. She issued fines for non-existent violations. She filed complaints with county offices under false pretenses." Mrs. Harris stood, her frail hands trembling. "She fined me $50 for planting roses. Said they weren't on her approved list." The Johnsons rose together. "She threatened us with a lien over a swing set from Walmart, said it wasn't community-approved equipment." Tom Henderson spoke louder now, his voice steady. "She forged signatures on meeting notes. Gerald Lewis told me himself." All eyes snapped back to Karen, her face flushed red, her hand tightening on the clipboard until her knuckles whitened. "Lies," she shouted. "All of you are conspiring against me." I raised my hand, quieting the room. "No, Karen, the conspiracy was yours, and now it's unraveling." Linda stepped forward, holding up another document. "This is the HOA's own corporate status, pulled directly from the state registry. It expired 18 months ago. The HOA doesn't even exist legally anymore." A collective gasp. Neighbors shifted, whispering furiously. Karen's authority evaporated like mist in the sun. At that moment, my attorney, Mr. Daniels, a sharp man in a navy suit, stood from the back row, his voice carried with professional weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've reviewed the documents. Not only is Mr. Thous correct, but Mrs. Whitfield has exposed herself to serious liability. Issuing fines without authority, forging documents, and filing false complaints constitute fraud, harassment, and potentially criminal misconduct." He turned to Karen. "Ma'am, your actions could result in personal lawsuits. If you've collected fees under a dissolved HOA, that's embezzlement." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. I was protecting the community," she stammered. The crowd erupted, voices rose, anger spilling into the air. "You stole from us. You lied about the rules. You made us afraid in our own homes." Karen banged her clipboard on the podium, desperate to regain control. "Silence. I am the president. I decide what's legal here." But no one listened. I stepped closer, my voice calm but cutting through the chaos. "Karen, you've spent months fining, threatening, and bullying us with fake authority. But tonight we're finished being your victims." The room quieted. Every eye turned to me. I reached into the folder one last time and pulled out a single sheet I'd prepared in secret. I held it high, letting the room take in the bold header, "Special Assessment Notice." Karen blinked. What is that?" I smiled coldly. "You like assessments, don't you? You like fees, fines, penalties. Well, tonight we turn the tables. This notice declares a special assessment on you. $5,000. Payable immediately to cover the costs of your fraud, your fake signs, your harassment." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Karen's eyes went wide, her clipboard sagging in her grip. I leaned forward, lowering my voice so the room hung on every word. "For months, you've made us pay. Now, Karen, it's your turn." The clubhouse smelled like burnt coffee and old paper, the fluorescent lights humming as neighbors shifted in their seats. The air was thick with accusation and the kind of tension that makes people sit straighter, lean forward, listen for the next blow. We'd already emptied our folders across the table, papers, deeds, and photocopies fanned out like evidence at a trial. Tonight was the turning point, the moment we took the energy Karen had weaponized and turned it back toward her. Karen stood beside the podium, face a study in defiance. Her neon vest looked ridiculous under the hall lights. For months she'd treated it like armor. Now it made her look smaller, like a child wearing a costume. She clutched her clipboard, but it offered no comfort. Around us, murmurs rolled like a tide. Some faces were angry, others relieved, but most were exhausted. I rose and walked to the front again, folder in hand. My voice was steady, measured. I'd practiced this in my head 100 times. But practice doesn't harden your stomach. "Neighbors," I said, "you've seen the paper trail, the forged minutes, the fake fines, the illegal signs, the county complaints she filed in bad faith. We have proof of embezzlement fees collected under a dissolved association, and we have proof she lied to you. It's time to act." Mr. Daniels, my attorney, stood behind me, palms flat against the podium. "Under the HOA bylaws," he said, "the board has the authority to levy special assessments to cover community expenses and to correct misconduct. But that authority must be exercised through proper votes and recorded minutes. When an officer acts unilaterally, especially to collect funds under false pretenses, that officer can be held personally liable. His voice gave the room the legal backbone it needed. Nugget: HOA boards can levy special assessments for legitimate community needs, but misuse collecting fees for non-existent services or pocketing funds exposes individuals to civil and criminal liability. In many jurisdictions, officers who breach fiduciary duties can be held personally responsible. I laid out a proposed special assessment on the lectern, a targeted recovery to reimburse residents and cover legal costs associated with Karen's fraudulent activity. The total I'd calculated, conservative and documented, was $5,000. This sum covers the fees she collected, the cost to remove illegal signage, and the legal expenses we've incurred to clear the county complaints she filed, I said. It is not punitive, it is corrective. Karen's mouth opened. You can't do that, you have no authority to single me out for payments, she spat, and her voice echoed in the hall. Tom Henderson stood up, his voice loud and steady. We were misled, we voted under false pretenses. Our money was used for services that didn't exist. This assessment is a way to recover what was stolen. Mr. Daniels guided the board through procedure. A motion, a second, a recorded vote. This was not revenge, it was accountability. We moved to approve a special assessment in the amount of $5,000 to be levied against the person responsible for misappropriation of HOA funds for the purpose of restitution and remediation, he read. A neighbor seconded. Karen sputtered, flailing for the language of authority. Votes can't target a single person. That's illegal. Her hands trembled. Mr. Daniels answered, crisp. When an officer abuses their role and personally benefits, the board may approve restitution measures and pursue reimbursement. This action is within our rights if supported by evidence and documented in the minutes. The vote was called. Hands went up, at first hesitant, then more, until assent closed the room. The clerk tallied the votes. Unanimous. Karen's color drained. Before she could gather herself, the back doors burst open and 2 sheriff deputies entered, their presence snapping everyone to attention. One held a stack of stamped envelopes and an official folder. Ms. Whitfield? The deputy asked. Her eyes darted to the badge, then to me. What is this? She demanded. The deputy stepped forward. You are being served with notice of a formal investigation into allegations of fraud and embezzlement related to your role within the association. You are advised of your rights. We'll need to take statements. Karen's hand flew to her throat. Her knees buckled. The clipboard fell from her fingers and clattered to the floor. No, this is a mistake, she wailed. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as deputies read the charges. The words fraud, embezzlement, falsified records hung heavy. Mr. Daniels stepped forward, offering procedural assistance. We've delivered our file to investigators, he said. The evidence supports their inquiry. Karen tried to rally. You'll regret this. I'll ruin you, she shouted, panic making her sound small. The deputy's expression was flat. We'll handle the investigation, he said, and officers took statements from witnesses. Cameras flashed as some neighbors recorded. Several people stepped forward, telling of fines paid, services promised and not delivered, threats made. Karen staggered back and collapsed into a folding chair near the podium. Her body shook and she buried her face in her hands. You'll regret this, she whispered, now more frightened than furious. A hush settled. People looked at one another, some teary, some relieved. Tom patted my shoulder. Mrs. Harris dabbed her eyes. A few who had supported Karen earlier sat frozen, shame washing over them. I felt a tightness in my chest, vindication and sorrow braided together. None of this felt sweet. I met Linda's eyes. She nodded once. We'd done the right thing. The deputy asked neighbors to step forward and sign sworn statements. Several did, hands trembling as they recounted fines paid and services promised that never happened. Investigators collected phones and printed messages, photographs of illegal signs, screenshots of invoices, receipts showing payments into an account linked to Karen. Daniels handed over a USB with scanned bank records and copies of forged meeting minutes. The lead investigator nodded, taking everything. The clerk prepared intake forms and recorded witnesses' contact information. They took the documents and began the intake. Outside, the night air felt different. Investigations would follow and Karen's reign would unravel. Deputies escorted her to the office for questioning. She glared toward me. You'll regret this, she snapped one last time, fury flaring despite collapse. I answered calmly, we didn't start this, you did. Her scream was small and broken as doors closed. The room felt oddly empty, like a storm had passed. Neighbors gathered in small groups, planning repairs and refunds. We'd turned fear into force, her own mechanism used to undo her. Justice, slow and procedural, had its own satisfaction. The community hall looked different the next week. Same squeaky chairs, same buzzing lights, but the energy had shifted. Where there had once been fear and suspicion, there was now resolve. Neighbors filed in, not clutching fines or notices, but talking openly, greeting one another like friends, rediscovering trust. Tom Henderson stood at the front with a clipboard, not Karen's iron weapon, but a simple tool. He cleared his throat. We're here tonight for one reason. To decide once and for all whether Brookstone Estates needs an HOA at all. The room quieted. I sat with Linda at my side, her hand steady on mine. Claire leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes calm but watchful. Tom continued. We've seen what happens when power goes unchecked. We've been fined for mailboxes, flags, swing sets, even roses. We were told lies about ownership, about rules, about authority that never existed. Now we know better. Tonight, we get to choose. A neighbor raised her hand. Can we just dissolve it? Start fresh? Mr. Daniels, my attorney, nodded from the corner. Yes. Under state law, if the members vote unanimously to dissolve a corporation, it ceases to exist. All records close, all authority ends. What you build afterward is up to you. The words settled like sunlight on water. One by one, neighbors straightened in their chairs. Hands rose, voices followed. Dissolve it. End it. No more Karen. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. For the first time in years, every voice in Brookstone agreed. Applause rippled through the hall, awkward at first, then growing stronger. People smiled, relief showing in their faces. Mrs. Harris dabbed her eyes with a tissue. It feels like a weight has been lifted, she whispered. Tom cleared his throat again. So what comes next? We still want to keep our neighborhood clean, our lake safe, our streets welcoming, but we don't need fines and threats to do it. We need cooperation. A younger neighbor, one of the Johnsons, spoke up. What if we form a volunteer committee? No fines, no authority, just people pitching in, a sign-up sheet for mowing the entrance lawn, fixing lights, planning barbecues. Heads nodded around the room. For once, people weren't afraid to volunteer. They weren't worried about being punished. They were ready to contribute freely. By the time the meeting ended, a simple plan was in place. A rotation for yard maintenance, a budget managed openly, community events scheduled by volunteers. No bylaws, no president, just neighbors. When we walked home that night, Linda squeezed my hand. The moonlight reflected on the calm lake, the water glimmering like it was breathing easier too. You did it, she said softly. I shook my head. We did it. You held the line. Claire brought the law. The neighbors found their voices. All I did was keep the papers safe. Linda smiled. Sometimes that's the hardest thing, holding steady when the storm is loudest. Her quiet strength humbled me. For months, she'd been the one reminding me not to shout, not to break, but to build the case, step by step. Tonight proved she'd been right all along. The next weekend, life felt normal again, better than normal. Kids sprawled across driveways, chalking hopscotch squares and smiley faces without fear of fines. Families gathered in yards, grills smoking, laughter rising without a clipboard hovering nearby. Mrs. Harris planted roses along her fence, red and bright, without worrying about approved lists. Tom raised the flag on his pole, steady and proud, no notice taped to it. The Johnson kids squealed on their swing set, no threats of lions hanging over their parents' heads. And on our dock the water lapped gently. I cast my line into the lake. The same lake Karen had once claimed as her battleground. Now it was quiet, free, holy hours again. Linda sat beside me, sipping iced tea, watching the children play. Feels good, doesn't it? She asked. I nodded, the weight in my chest finally gone. It feels like we got our lives back. The mail truck rumbled down the street, stopping at each house. For the first time in months, envelopes weren't a source of dread. No more yellow slips, no more threats, just letters, bills, and postcards from relatives. Linda waved to the driver, smiling. Safe deliveries again, she said. Safe everything, I replied. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the lake gold, Claire joined us on the porch. She'd traded her deputy's uniform for jeans and a t-shirt, but her presence carried the same authority. You proud of yourself, Dad? She teased lightly. I chuckled. Proud of us. We stood together. We didn't back down. Claire's smile softened. You showed everyone here that rules aren't stronger than rights. That matters more than you know. Linda leaned against my shoulder. The mailbox doesn't just deliver letters, she said. It delivers the law. Her words lingered in the evening air, warm and true. As night fell, neighbors wandered over with burgers and coolers, unplanned but welcome. We grilled, laughed, and swapped stories, not about harassment or fines, but about fishing trips and school events. For the first time, Brookstone Estates felt like a community, not a battlefield. I looked around at the glow of porch lights, the sound of kids chasing fireflies, the smell of barbecue in the air. Peace had returned. And as I watched Linda smile, proud and steady, I realized something. Power doesn't come from clipboards or fines. It comes from people standing firm, side by side, choosing freedom over fear. When I look back on those months, it still amazes me how quickly a dream can sour when the wrong person decides they're in charge. I bought this property because of the lake. I pictured mornings casting a line in quiet waters, evenings swimming with the kids, weekends with friends gathered on the dock. I never imagined a clipboard and a neon vest could turn peace into war. But that's the truth about HOAs and about people like Karen. They thrive on intimidation. They wave bylaws like weapons, hoping fear will make you fold. They talk louder, act bolder, and assume no one will challenge them. Here's the lesson I learned. HOA rules are not the law. Deeds are, titles are, county records are. When you know your rights, intimidation crumbles. Linda said something one night that stuck with me. We were watching the sunset ripple across the lake after the final vote. She leaned against me and whispered, "The lake doesn't just reflect the sky, it reflects who truly owns it." She was right. That reflection wasn't Karen. It wasn't the HOA's. It was ours, because the deed said so. Nugget: always check deeds, easements, and property records. HOAs can only enforce what their bylaws and jurisdiction allow, and nothing more. If their authority isn't deeded or recorded with the county, it's just paper and bluff. Neighbors thanked me, but the truth is, this wasn't just my fight. It was everyone's. Tom standing up about his mailbox. Mrs. Harris speaking out about her roses. Families saying, "Enough." That's what toppled Karen's reign. Not just a deed, but a community remembering it had a voice. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't let someone scare you into silence. Don't confuse loudness with power, and never mistake HOA fines for law. Because at the end of the day, the only authority that matters is what's written in ink at the county office, not what's scribbled on a clipboard. And now Brookstone is finally what it should have been all along: neighbors, not enemies. If you've ever dealt with a Karen or an HOA, you know how wild it can get. So like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe for more, and tell me where you're watching from. Because whether it's lakeside in Texas or a cul-de-sac in Ohio, one thing's universal: truth always floats to the surface.